Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami Stackelhouse, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhouse, and this is episode 124. Today, I have a special bonus episode for you. I'm sharing another of our stories of hope. Today, I'm interviewing Kim Osborne, who is currently a student in our Certified Fibromyalgia Coach training program. Kim came to me in September 2022, about a year ago, and she was really struggling and at the end of her resources and at the end of her rope. Kim had tried all the things she knew to try and had talked to everyone she could think of. She consulted with all of her providers and still didn't have the help she needed for her fibromyalgia. In fact, she felt like her life was shrinking, and many of the things that used to work for her to help her cope with her fibromyalgia pain and her symptoms really just weren't working for her anymore. Her rheumatologist gave her the advice that many of us have heard, which is, I bet you can guess, focus on your diet, eat well, and move more. Kim even became a health coach and a yoga instructor to learn all she could about nutrition and exercise. But at the end of it all, even with her training as a health coach, as a yoga instructor, even with eating a really clean diet and doing all that yoga, she was still feeling miserable, and her life kept getting smaller and smaller, which is when Kim reached out to me. Now, before Kim shares her story, I want to remind you that Kim is going to be sharing what worked for her. The information in this podcast is never meant to be considered medical advice, nor is it intended to replace consulting with a qualified physician or other healthcare provider. These are the things that worked for Kim. Please use this as inspiration, absolutely, and discuss what might work for you with your own providers. Now, let me introduce you to Kim. Kim lives outside Savannah, Georgia, with her husband, Tim. They have grown children and the joy of being Lolly and Papa to two beautiful granddaughters. Before her fibromyalgia diagnosis, Kim was the founder of a nonprofit, Hope for Savannah, and worked alongside families of children diagnosed with cancer. Several years ago, she also started a small wellness company, Turning North. She started this to help others make small habit changes that promote a healthier lifestyle. Kim is a certified health coach, a yoga instructor, and currently training to be a certified fibromyalgia coach. Helping others has always been an important priority for Kim, and coaching fibromyalgia clients helps to bring purpose to her own journey. Kim is one of the student coaches you can actually schedule a consultation with on our Find a Coach page. Just go to findafibrocoach.com. You'll also find that link on today's show notes page at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/124. Make sure you stay on after my interview with Kim for additional resources related to the topics Kim and I discussed today, as well as information on our next live Stories of Hope and Healing event. Hi, Kim. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to explore your story for everyone.
Tami, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. As you and I were talking before we started recording, sharing our stories has such power, and it can really help other people see that if not only I can do it, but you can do it, maybe they can feel better too. So I'm thrilled that you are here to be able to share your story. So, like all good stories, why don't we start at the beginning? When were you, we don't have to go back that far. When were you diagnosed? I know that's not really where your story starts with me, but just to refresh me and for everyone else, when were you diagnosed?
So I actually was not diagnosed until about 5 years ago, although I had very clear symptoms that started in 2005.
Nice. Okay. So that is pretty common, right? We start to suspect, we start having symptoms, but then it can take a while to get a diagnosis. And that is very common. What happened between when you got your diagnosis and when you and I finally connected last year? I mean, those 5 years, were you handling things pretty well, or were you just kind of blindly going along? Like, what happened in those 5 years?
Well, I can tell you now in hindsight that I wasn't handling things very well.
Yep.
And it wasn't for lack of trying. I worked just as hard those 5 years as I have this past year in healing. I just didn't have the right tools. I didn't have the right education on it. Didn't have a coach. There was just so much missing. And so when I had met with my rheumatologist and got the diagnosis, and he and I were working together, I quickly realized that the three most commonly prescribed drugs for fibromyalgia were not going to be a good fit for my body and the way I reacted. So, he was very honest with me. He was very compassionate and kind. And he said, I really, unfortunately, I always feel like I just don't have enough tools to give you guys. And he
Hmm.
said, could you maybe think about trying just really focusing on what you eat, how you move, maybe try yoga? And I thought, okay, well, I can do those things.
Hmm.
And so I did. I went to multiple yoga classes and I couldn't find a class that was the right fit for my body. And so fortunately, I found a studio owner who was willing to train me to become a yoga instructor so that I could learn how that might help my body. The best thing that came out of that were the breathing techniques and meditation. And those were pretty helpful at the time. But it just wasn't enough. And I found myself, it was just like a slow fade, though. My life was getting smaller and smaller, was letting more and more things go. And
Hmm.
it was a downward slide.
Yes, very much so. I know that that was the case for me and for lots of people. And, we don't always realize how bad things get because it happens so gradually. Like you said, that downward slide. And, sometimes we also don't realize because, like, this is our everyday normal. Right. And
Right.
sometimes it takes people from the outside to say, hey, that's not normal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we begin to isolate in such a way that there aren't those voices coming to us saying that's not normal because we're just
Hmm.
trying to hang on to everything we have.
Yeah.
And, I just got to a point where it all just sort of blew up for me and what became probably the hardest time I'd had with fibro.
Now, before we get into that, I want to rewind a little bit to something you said a minute ago, which was that the three FDA approved meds for fibromyalgia you had decided really weren't for you. And I know the reason, but for the person listening who might not know that reason, what were some of those reasons why you just knew that wasn't the right path for you?
Yes. So before I had my diagnosis, I was in a job that was really difficult and was really struggling emotionally. And I went to my physician and, I'm crying all the time. This is really
Yeah.
tough. And was prescribed an antidepressant and had a really bad reaction to it. And so when I went back and they said, well, I think it might be time for a new job for
Yeah.
you because this is not working for you. And so when I talked with my rheumatologist about these things, I just wasn't willing to, I knew that it was not going to go well for me with that. And
Hmm.
I felt like I would be sacrificing one set of symptoms for something a lot more difficult.
Hmm. Right, right. So you're one of those people then who tends to get the side effects for listed meds.
Check, check, check. You know?
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Okay. Just to set the stage there. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you and I first talked, it was September of last year, 2022. What led up to that? What got you to the point where you're like, okay, all that isn't working. I've got to do something else.
Yeah. So thinking about our conversation today, I decided yesterday to go back and reread my journals and kind of get back in touch with where I was at during this time. And at the beginning of last year, so in January of 22, I had just started this prayer of uproot misinformation. And I would just pray to God about, please just uproot the misinformation in my life so that I'm not acting on things that just aren't true. And do not pray that prayer unless you want your whole life
That's like praying for patience, right?
yes. Yeah, I don't recommend it unless you're ready to do the work. But I can go back in my journal and just see how layer after layer kind of started to be peeled back. And the first one for me personally was I had been using a couple of glasses of wine in the evening each night to help offset the pain.
Hmm.
Sometimes two glasses became three. I felt terrible the next day, whether I had one, had two, or three, but I felt good for the evening and I felt finally some relief and some relaxation. But April 1st, April Fool's Day, I decided to take a 21-day challenge, a break, and just see how my body reacted. I was really beginning to realize that it was affecting my sleep. So while I was getting a couple of hours of relief, I was really still paying for it with some of the other symptoms with fibro, with the poor sleep, the brain fog, muscle pain the next day. So I stopped. And that 21 days, I realized that I needed to explore that further. So I just kept it up. But I was struggling with pain. Man, was I struggling with pain to the point that I couldn't practice some of yoga and some of the things that had been helping me. And so again, I go back and read these journal entries, and all summer, I was just, okay, I'm ready to do something different here. But there was this hopelessness that was really settling in because I felt like I knew that the FDA approved drugs were not an option. I wasn't going to go back to using the evening wine as an option. And I was like, I'm out of cards, what, I can't do yoga anymore. I was practicing my breathing, but I just felt really limited. And so, we talked about that too, like the life becoming smaller and smaller. And the pain was just getting so incredible that I just started Googling anything I could find, hope with fibromyalgia. Like just, and it was really hard though, for me to find, I didn't know that my community was out there. And that's when I came across your podcast. And I was immediately, like on the first episode, I was so drawn in because you spoke with such joy, but it wasn't that toxic false positivity. There was something that was ringing true so much in my ear. It's authentic. Your story. And again, I'm just binging these podcast episodes now because there were a lot out. And I began to learn new ways and new thinking and things I had not been exposed to from any other healthcare provider, who had, because they didn't know these things.
Hmm.
So I began to, okay, here's more information that maybe I need to learn. So after binging all the podcast episodes I could, I sent you an email and reached out. Then we got to talk. And that was probably the first time I had felt hope that not just that I could maintain, but that I could get better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's such a powerful thing, right? Like so often we're just trying to not get worse. you know? Like how do I tread water? How do I hang on with my fingernails? How do I just not get worse?
Yeah, it really affects your thinking. It affects your mood, your attitude. Like just when you're thinking about your future and you're thinking about this is only going to get worse and you already feel like you're at your limit, that's not a good place to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I remember when you and I talked, one of the things we talked about was, should you just work with a coach or should you take the Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor program? And I remember telling you, Kim, your doctor told you to try, nutrition and yoga. So you became a health coach and you became a yoga instructor. So clearly you need to take the class because this is just how you do things.
Yes, you definitely had the insight into the way I think very quickly.
Yeah. But
Yes,
in all
and
seriousness, right? Like there must be something about you that's like, if I'm going to do this, like I really want to know, right? Not just the surface
yeah.
stuff, but I want to dig in.
Yeah, well, I think, we have had to be our own advocates for so long. And I felt like, a lot of the things like becoming the health coach, becoming the yoga instructor, a lot of that was me always like carving out my own way. But when I connected with you, it was like all of a sudden I tapped into this community and I began to see that I wasn't going to have to do all the work, right? That there was someone. And so being seen, being understood on those phone calls, that was the breath of fresh air. And so if anyone's listening today and you're just out there feeling like maybe this is all in your head or that you just are too sensitive or that you just need to exercise more or you just need to eat better or do enough yoga, that's just not the answer. And you're not alone, but it's so much easier being on this journey when you find that community of support that can offer the education, that can offer the accountability and coaching. But a lot of it, Tammy, was just like both with you and then the coaches I've interacted with, the people in this program that I've met. It's the camaraderie of like being truly understood. That had not happened for me before
Hmm.
since my diagnosis with fibro.
Right. And so often, even our doctors don't really know. I mean, occasionally we've got special doctors like Dr. Ginevra, but who
Right.
has fibromyalgia herself, but most of our providers don't. And so even if they're sympathetic, empathetic, they still don't know. And so they can't see us, relate to us in quite the same way as somebody who's actually walked that path.
Absolutely. And again, so well meaning. I know my rheumatologist just has looked at me and said those exact words. His eyes are just filled with compassion, but saying, I don't know how you feel because while I've treated so many of you like this, I don't have it, but it's not the same as when someone can kind of look into your eyes and say, I do know.
Hmm.
I know what it's like on all of those symptoms.
Hmm. It's such a powerful thing to be seen, right?
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
So you decided to join the class. You were working with Dr. Robin Pfaff as your coach.
Yeah.
So tell us what that was like. So we connected, we chatted, and then you connected with Robin and started to work with her.
Yes, so that was really powerful because it was my first time really being coached after having been a health coach, but to have that and to make myself coachable, right? To say I'm going to go into this again, uproot misinformation and be willing to do things that I hadn't maybe either thought of before or had heard but wasn't willing to do, to be willing to hear it all out, all of the ideas. And I can say with certainty that, like, the decision I made this time last year with both connecting with you, then getting connected with Robin, and then her guidance and starting to see a functional medicine practitioner, those were game changers. Like, that is why this time, this year, this moment is been so filled with healing and why I'm at where I am at. So coaching was don't underestimate the power of coaching because again, you're being coached by someone who has that first person understanding of like exactly how you have been feeling and they are further ahead of you on their journey and can offer so much education, resources, thoughts, ideas. It was really powerful.
What surprised you about working with Robin that was different maybe than you expected for working with a coach?
So I remember one of our conversations, she wanted to talk to me about self compassion. And I was like, we don't need to do this. I've got this. How we talk to ourselves. And, you know, I did not know. She said, hear me out. And she gave me some great resources and some things to look at. And we began to really dive into that a whole lot. What self care looks like. Again, something I thought that I was nailing. And diving deep into it, realized there were areas I really needed to work on in that. That was really surprising for me, though, because I think I felt like because I've been trying so hard, maybe the last 5, 10 years, that I was taking all this time for myself,
Mm-hmm. Right.
but
Doing all the eating right and the yoga and the like checking all the boxes, doing all the right things. But you can do those things in a way that's not really self-care and it's just another job.
it was a job. And I was telling my body what it was going to do, right? My mind was telling, like, you will complete this. You will eat X amount of vegetables today, instead of, really being grateful for my body, being grateful for all it's done for me these last 51 years, and how hard it is working to heal. So, I mean, that conversation just happened right over the last minute or so, but that represents months of work there, Took
Mm-hmm.
a lot of deep diving there.
Yeah, definitely. And I know one of the things when you and I first talked too is you were preparing for a special trip.
Oh,
And you and I did a lot of talking about how you could do this trip in a fibro body and hopefully still be kind to yourself.
wow. October 22. Yes, I had plans. It was a trip that was only about 3 hours away in the car, 2 nights away, and it felt completely undoable. It was something I wanted to be looking forward to. I was going to one of my favorite places that I enjoy, seeing some of my favorite people, but I just could not stand the idea of being in so much pain and being so uncomfortable away from home, away
Hmm.
from those things that I had learned here, how to be comfortable. But yes, we did a lot of coaching around getting ready for that trip.
And how did that trip go? I know we'll talk about how the trip went this year, just as a contrast, but to set the stage, how did it go with all the preparation we did and talking that we did and planning?
Yes. So it was a lot of work. It was a whole lot of work. And I had to come back early. I
Mm.
was only able to stay one of the 2 nights. And I did it. I did go down there. I did see my people. I did get to go to one of my favorite places, but it was all really shrouded with the pain, the discomfort, the sleep issues. It was just a tough time. I was really proud of myself, though, for trying. There were some things that I did put into place. I had a few tools in my toolkit then that I put into place and tried. And I think that's what made it that I was even able to stay one night. But yeah, it was a tough trip.
And most of the work that you did with Robin and the class with me happened after that trip. So this trip really was a good example of your before.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So then what happened? Actually, let's just jump ahead. How was this year? And then we'll talk about how you got there. What was this
Okay.
year like?
And so this year was so much better. It was to the exact same place, 3 hours away, and seeing the same people, actually going to the same little favorite place I have in St. Augustine. And, it was funny because the weather was actually so much worse. They were under tornado warnings
This year?
while we were there. And
Oh my.
so fibro people know that change in weather and everything can be really tough on you. But we called one of the places that we really wanted to go to was the alligator farm down there. And we called to make sure they were still open that day because that was what I had done the year before and I wanted to do it differently. So we put on our raincoats and we went and we had such a fabulous time. And my body was up for it. I stayed both nights. I actually doubled my normal daily step count while I was there. I slept beautifully through the night. I woke up refreshed. I came home without having a flare up. It was just an entirely different experience. And, I will say this, in October of 21, and like when I came back from that trip that was so bad, and I told Robin, I said, I want to go there next year. And I want to do this, the biggest thing I've ever done. I want to cross the rope obstacle course and do the zip line over the alligators. I had this big, big grand scheme of I've got a year to prepare. Because again, you know me, I want to do it all the
If
way.
we're going to do it, we're going to do it all.
Do it all the way. And I remember Robin just so patient and so kind. And she just said, okay, you can definitely do that if that's what you want. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I said, what do you mean by that? Because if I can do it, I should do it. And she said, well, I have no doubt that you can do it, but what would recovery be like in 45 minutes on a rope obstacle course, 30 feet
Right.
up in the air? What is that going to look like? And so I changed my goal, like the way I was going to celebrate when I got there this year. And instead, we chose to do what they call a sloth experience.
And that
right
just
up my
cracks
alley.
me up because the sloth, like that's our speed right there.
It was definitely the best choice to make because,
Yeah.
again, all the steps and all the things that had to be done, but it was kind of also pretty incredible to get to feed a creature from the rainforest directly,
Mhm.
giving him apple slices and it right
Mhm.
into his mouth. And it was something I'll never forget. And it was the perfect way to mark that. But again, that's a lot of work that I did over this past year and just even changing my expectations for how I chose to celebrate something, how I chose to mark something.
Mhm. So going from that difficult trip to this year, having it be the trip that you wanted it to be, that we so often underestimate what we can accomplish in a year, right? We never hit it right. We either think, oh, I'll be able to do all the things, right? The
Yeah.
obstacle course, the zip line, like the whole thing. Or we think, I'll never get there, right? And so
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to share your story today was to show really just like we actually can do a lot in a year, and that year
So
is going to
much.
go by quick and that year is going to go by anyway, right? Like next year is going to come around just like clockwork and it could be a better year or it could not. And it just depends on
Yeah.
what you do between now and then.
Yeah. I think the saddest thing would have been if I was to open up my journal today and see the same plea as I was, or the same prayer I was praying at a year and a half ago now for change and to have not done that.
Mhm.
You're right, because a year went by and I could again, and it had nothing to do with how hard I was working. So I could have been continuing to do the same things and gotten the same results. Or I could have actually stepped out and tried something that other people were saying works. And I knew that what I was doing on my own in and of itself was just not working. And a lot of that was because, trying to make just say that the yoga and the eating well, my plan, those are still very much a big part of my wellness journey, but they're just small little pieces in that puzzle because there's not just one thing. And we're probably not going to find it on our own. We need support, we need the guidance. So having a coach help you out with, again, giving you some knowledge, helping you and supporting you as you make the decisions that are best for you and finding out what is that's the secret sauce.
I think a lot of times that word coach, people don't really know what that means, or they have a
Mm,
slightly off version of what that means. And,
yes.
you can think of it like a mentor, right? Like a big sister who's been through what you've been through, who's sharing what worked for them and extra knowledge, or a mentor like you have at work, or a sponsor like in AA who might hold you accountable and, give you tips on practical ways to live this new life you've got now, right?
Yeah. I think I was so resistant for so long because I felt like it was going to be someone telling me what to do.
Hmm.
And you and I have talked about this before. For those who know the Enneagram and know their type, if you're a type 8, which I am, you don't like to be told what to do. You don't want to feel controlled, or you want to be very much in control of these things.
And
And
that's
I
a
think,
great way to not have you do something is to tell you to do it. Well,
oh,
now I
yes.
can't do that because you told me.
Yes, it's tough. Nobody wants to be told what to do, but that's not what your coach is. They're making suggestions. They're giving, again, that educational piece. And hey, did you know about this? And like Robin, she didn't say, you absolutely should not do that obstacle course and the zip line. She
Hmm.
helped me to make the decision that was right for me by asking me questions.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. And that's such a good point that, as a coach, we're not here to tell you what to do. We're simply here to help you do what you want to do. Right? So, as the client, you're the one setting the goals. You're the one deciding what we're going to work on. Sure, we'll give you information, we'll give you education. We might even give you guidance if you were to ask us and say, I don't know, what should I work on? We'll give you our thoughts on that for sure. But
Right.
we're not going to tell you this is what you need to do. Very occasionally, I might give a client some homework, but usually because of something that they've said was important to them. And I know this particular exercise or task or whatever will move them closer to that. But still, they're the ones who are setting the agenda.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always felt like I was in the driver's seat. I just had all the support in the world.
Mhm. So, what were some of the things that you did over that year? I mean, obviously, it wasn't just meeting with Robin that magically made it all work.
Right.
You
Right.
mentioned meeting with a functional medicine doctor and how that kind of changed the game.
Yes, that was one of the first suggestions that Robin gave and helped me to look in and find a provider in my area. And I got the appointment, and I had never seen, or I really didn't understand what functional medicine was. But as we talked and I got comfortable with it, I was prepared for my appointment. And wow, what a difference that appointment was. It was,
Mhm.
I'm assuming that this is like that across the board, that first appointment is big time, but it was 2 hours. And to sit down and have someone take notes and listen to that. And again, lots of testing and different things that were done coming back. It was just a whole different approach. And again, it was one of the game changers.
And for the person who's listening who may not know about functional medicine, why don't you share what the difference was for you?
Yeah. So with functional medicine, she was interested in the root cause here. So we know that fibromyalgia is an amplifier of our pain, of any other underlying issues going on. And so instead of being so focused on just my symptoms, it was, let's dig in deeper. And she began to ask a lot more questions. And again, with some of the blood work, some of the other testing things that we did, she came back with some underlying diagnoses, some things that were going on that needed to be treated. And as those things have begun to resolve, if fibro doesn't have anything to amplify, it's a lot quieter.
That's right. That's right. I also think of functional medicine, that word functional, thinking about, that these are people who are trying to help your body function its best way possible. So they might look at lab results slightly differently, right? Like the recommended daily allowance, the RDA for vitamin C is just enough to not cause scurvy, which is a whole lot different than being a level that promotes you feeling as well as possible, right? Like those are two very different numbers. And so functional medicine doctors tend to look at that. How do we help you function as good as we can, feeling as good as
Absolutely.
possible?
And you mentioned the vitamin C, but one of the biggest surprises with her was the way she looked at my thyroid, done so
Hmm.
differently than
Yep.
it had been looked at. And again, I have a very trusted family GP, and he's wonderful. Again, very caring, very compassionate. But she just had different training and different ideas and just looked at it differently, looked at the problem in a whole different way. So it was very eye opening. But I would say this, it was also pretty overwhelming. And I was very grateful for Robin's support, even in going through that adjustment, hearing all of this, learning new things, having someone who had been through that before to bounce
Yeah.
that off of, to even some days she just gave me suggestions to just let it rest, that it wasn't a day to do any work on it. And if I could maybe go to my joy list, which, you talk about, and
Yeah.
maybe find something else to do other than trying to solve those problems.
Hmm. Right. Because we tend to, I was thinking about this actually last night, and I can't remember now why I was thinking about this, but the difference between wanting to fix something and wanting to help, right? Or try to fix someone or help someone. And I think a lot of times we get in that mode of, I'm going to fix this fibromyalgia thing. Right. And we get in this like fix it mode, which is different than how can I help myself feel as best as I can feel. Right. I think there's this subtle difference between there's something wrong with me and that's broken that needs fixing. And that's kind of true. But also, your body is amazing and it just needs support to be able to do what it would naturally do, which is heal itself.
But learning to listen, learning to,
Yeah.
again, I was very fortunate to have someone to just help me to pause. And you say this a lot, that healing takes a lot of work. And sometimes, that looks like rest.
Yep.
And that's tough again for someone who wants to be on the go. And but listen, I wasn't on the go a year ago either. I was
I mean,
feeling
let's
too
be real.
crummy. Right. But when you start to feel better, right, the little bit, you're ready to go. But reminding that healing is still going on and it's an active
Yeah.
process. But there was a lot of points that I needed to be reminded to just rest,
Mhm.
to trust that my body was healing, but to my mind and body just kind of had to agree on that, to just
Mhm.
take a beat.
Right. And it takes time too, right? Like we can sit down and we can do a cram course and like learn everything about fibromyalgia in a weekend or whatever. But your body still needs time to literally heal and change, right? Like you can only speed up healing a certain amount, right? Like there's things we
Sure.
can do to make that go faster, but nature still needs to take its course. And that
Well,
I think is
sure.
part of it too, you know?
And for me, I know that we talked about how sensitive my body is to different things.
Hmm.
It's not going to take on a whole lot of new things at one time. Things had to be introduced in very slowly, one at a time, being mindful of what was going on and, what the effects of that were. And that's where the time came in for me a lot, was just, you're right, it didn't matter. I couldn't rush it. My body needed the time to heal, but it also needed the time to just adjust to some of the new things.
Right, right. So, I mean, like, exercise is good for us, but if you go out there and you like cram a whole lot of exercise in, your body's going to go, what?
And you know what we try to do on those days that we feel good, right?
That's
We try to
exactly
cram
what
it
we
all
do.
in,
Yeah.
right? A lot of this is learning, yeah, these tactics that
Hmm.
we have to tell ourselves on those good days so that we
Hmm.
can have more good days.
Yes. And that's part of where having a mentor that's actually walked that road really helps because a lot of times, even our doctors will tell us to do things a little too fast. Right?
Sure.
Like add these things in all at the same time or go out and take a 30-minute walk when you haven't walked at all. Right?
Right.
Like, but somebody who has walked that road, who has fibromyalgia, who knows is going to be able to say, yeah, maybe just start with a couple of minutes.
Yes, but also I will say this, learning alternative ways, like just since I've been a part of this community, you've introduced us to an app that helps out, to different types of movement therapy. It was, again, I was pigeonholing so much and like,
Mm.
I remember because my rheumatologist said so, yoga has got to be my thing. And he actually didn't even say that. He said, try it. But in my mind, that was the only thing I could do. And so being open to all this new stuff, but being a part of this community has opened me up to just things I probably never would have heard about had I still been trying to do this on my own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you worked with Robin, you took the advisor class. I do get
Yes.
this question a lot, like, do I hire a coach? Do I take the class? Which do I do? What advice would you give somebody who's maybe thinking about those two things? What was the difference for you and maybe what you got out of each one?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that because, again, going back to my journal, and I was praying that which of these things do I do? But with the advisor course, you get both.
Mm-hmm.
With the advisor course, you get that deep education, but you're also going to be coached while you're in the program. And those two things together, like they're like peanut butter and jelly, right? They go best together.
They do.
And so that was my experience, but I can't imagine had I just done coaching or if your program were set up differently and I'd just done the advisor course, I would not be where I'm at today at all. It was the melting of the two together for me, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I do see that actually, the people who get the best results do get the information, the education, the training through the advisor program, but they're also working with a coach because that coach is the one who can actually help them implement all the things that they've just learned, right? I mean, how often have we taken a class, watched one of those summits where like 20 people talk or whatever, but then do you implement any of it? Like that's actually the magical piece is the implementation.
Yeah, it would kind of be like, having all the, if you took a football analogy, like you've got all the plays and you give out all the instructions. And then as the quarterback does it, then he just goes and sits on the bench, right?
Right.
It doesn't do any good unless you put it into play.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly, I think, the danger in trying to do it alone.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. For so many reasons, right? Like there's just so much information out there that I don't know about you, but when I get overwhelmed, I just shut down. Like I don't do anything at all. So that's a big piece, right? But
Or
also
I bounce
just,
back and forth,
yeah,
right? From like, oh, I read
all
this
the
book
things and
and
then nothing.
yeah, yes, yes,
Yep,
yeah,
for sure. And then also just the accountability of it, right? Like we all kind of know some things we should be doing it, but
yeah,
doing it is a whole different game, right?
it is. It is.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. So now that we've got to this year, you're feeling so much better. What is next for Kim?
First of all, keeping this going, right?
Yeah.
Where am I going to be this time next year? Maybe I will be on that obstacle course, zip line.
Zip lining. Kim will be zip lining next year. Or maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe not. There's other experiences to do at the alligator farm, but that would definitely be something I would love one day to do. But I'm really learning to, we're just going to see where we're at and how this is going. But knowing that this time next year I'm going to feel better is quite exciting. The other thing that's been really wonderful part of this is, my life has opened back up. And so, as small as it had gotten, I can see it now beginning to open back up. When I reached out to you in September of 22, I had pretty much closed my business, my health coaching business, because I mean, who wants to work with a health coach who feels so rotten and feels terrible? I didn't feel, while I was very like my blood work, I'm super healthy, right? But I was not feeling that way. And so, working, getting healthier again, now being a part of the coaching program and working on my coaching internship, working again. Man, this time next year, I will be able to work as many hours as I want to and what I create. So that's what's next. I'm getting to do a lot more with my family, things that are important to me. It's just, I feel like I'm getting my life back.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. And, you are doing your coaching internship. So, by the way, for you listening, Kim is one of the student coaches you can actually schedule with right now. In fact, I think you just put some openings on your calendar, didn't you?
I did because I have, the energy, as more opens up, I'm ready to open up more appointments.
That's awesome. And you've already started working with some people. What
Yes.
is that like now? You worked with your coach. You were a health coach before, but what is that like for you now working with fibro people and helping them?
Yeah. I think, all my life, it's just been really important to give back. And I have found that in the work I did before fibromyalgia when I ran a nonprofit to now being able to give back to my own community, the community that I feel like has given so much to me. That means everything. And I find too that as I'm coaching clients, it's a part of my continued healing, right? So I know that there's so many people ahead of me on this journey. And again, I get to be a part of this great community where I can look ahead and see people who are living either mostly symptom free or completely symptom free. But there's a whole lot of people behind us on this path are where I was, a year and a half ago, and are feeling unseen. They're isolating. They are self medicating. They are feeling like there's no hope, right? I want to be a light. I want to be able to go back and shine a light in someone else's darkness and just to say, first of all, to say, I'm here, right? I see you, I get it, but there's hope. And the really unique thing is that you and I both know that there's not just one thing we're going to do that's going to make us feel better, right? We have to create this toolbox of all the different little pieces and the things, but it's going to be unique for each of us, right? What that looks like can just, you're going to tweak it and it's going to look different. And so I really enjoy helping people discover those things. And I want them to know that whichever coach they work with on the Find a Coach page has all of that information that they can help guide them on this journey. And so I just think it's really exciting to be because there's so many of us, Tami. There's so many people though who are just suffering in silence and they need that light. They need to know that there's hope. And you don't need to know how it's all going to happen or what it's going to look like a year from now. I think the first step is just maybe it's time to try something different.
Mm-hmm. Have a new conversation,
Yeah.
try something new, be open to
Huh.
possibilities and open to things that seem like it's so surprising to me how often something that I think shouldn't make a difference really does. I don't know if you've discovered that yet, but there have been a lot of things where I'm like, wow, is this like magic or something? Because I don't think it should help this much, but it really does.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I keep a list of things that are like, the 25 things that will help 4%, right? Because
Hmm.
my high school math teacher, college math teachers will tell you I'm not great at math, but I know that if I have 25 things that help 4%, we're talking 100. And
Yeah.
so, but the cool thing is that some of those, they might help 1 or 2%. But some of those are, like you say, they're the big piece of the puzzle. And you just kind of stand back and you're like, wow, that was a good move.
Hmm.
And again, things that I have found in this past year, everything that's on that list, with the exception, like I said, of the healthier eating and the movement, were not anything that any of my conventional medicine providers had talked to me about because, again, they just didn't know.
Hmm. Yeah. Y'all, there is so much that can be done to improve fibromyalgia. I'm telling you, it's not, I'm going to say what I mean and then I'll explain what I mean. So, this is not a hard thing to treat. What's hard is finding somebody that has the information and the expertise to be able to educate you and your providers on those things that are going to make a difference. But once you have that expertise, fibromyalgia is not really that hard to improve. I see it every day.
That is stunning to me. And if you had told me that, like, say, a year and a half ago, but I shouldn't be surprised because, like I said, I had two specialists who, again, looked with so much compassion and said, I just don't know how to treat you. One of those I saw again this year at the yearly visit, and she was so taken aback at because she only sees me once a year. She
Mm-hmm.
was so taken aback at how much I had changed in a year. And she said, the minute you graduate, I want you to bring in cards, flyers, whatever, because we just don't have the time to learn, all of this information, right, that you have. And there's just so many people I want to help that I cannot help in my limited office visit. But bring your
Right.
cards, I want you to be in place. And I think that just goes to show that, the information you taught us, like it took us months to learn all of that. It is a lot of information, but it can be implemented and put into place. They're not hard things.
No, no.
And especially for someone like me with the sensitivities, like if I can do these things, right, anyone can do these things.
Right. And the way the puzzle looks for each person, as you said earlier, is different, right? Kim's puzzle does not have a piece that says medication on it, but some people that is it was certainly an important part of my journey, going on medications for a while so I could eventually not be on those medications. But everybody's puzzle looks different, and having that support and that guidance and somebody who knows not just what worked for them, but like, here's what other people have tried. Here's what worked for other clients. Here's what my other coach friends have shared about, right? I think that's one of the coolest things about our community is we're not just tapping into one person's information, right? Not even mine. Like we're a collective and people are always bringing in new things that I've never heard of. So,
Yeah. I love that on the coaching calls to hear those things. And I
yeah.
do want to clarify that it's not that I'm against prescriptions or it was just those three specific ones that weren't a good fit for me because my functional medicine provider actually suggested a prescription for LDN that has been a huge game changer for me.
Low
And
dose
so
naltrexone. We're going to be doing an episode on that in the future, y'all. I know
that's
you hear me
exciting.
talk about that a lot, but we're going to devote an episode to low dose naltrexone. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So you're right. It is finding what we are unique creations. Each of
We
us
are.
were just created so differently. And we, just as we have different personalities, our bodies want different things and need different things and feel differently. So I think, the advantage again to this program is learning how to listen to your body, right? Being given a whole lot of choices but knowing how that makes you feel as an individual,
Right.
how that works.
That's awesome. So, as we wrap up, I would love for you to talk to the person listening who, this episode is going to come out the day after Christmas. And
Mm,
so I'm sure there is someone listening right now who is like, kind of like your trip last year. It did not go the way they wanted it to go. Holidays were not the holiday they dreamed of. And they're frustrated with that and thinking, could next year maybe be better, be different? I would love for you to just talk to that person from your heart.
mm. I'll try not to be emotional because, again, reading back over this journal and seeing where I was at, I just have so much empathy for where, if I'm speaking to them, where you are at right now on your journey. I have empathy for the hopelessness, for maybe the self medicating, for the beating yourself up because you couldn't be all you wanted to be to everyone you love during this season, for just being at the end of yourself. You might be considering all the different things you could do for a New Year's resolution
Mm-hmm.
and just setting yourself up maybe for what hasn't worked before it's probably not going to work again, right? But the whole uproot misinformation, maybe just be willing to reach out and ask for help from people who have been where you are and are not there anymore, right? Who are ahead of you on that journey. And all it takes is just, I mean, you can hop on the website and check it out. There's so much you can do. And whatever it is you do, whether you binge all these podcast episodes like I did and learn new things. And if you have a provider who you can work with, but don't be afraid to do something so completely different and allow someone into your life, like a coach, that can begin to just help you navigate this, because you just shouldn't be having to do this alone. There is a wonderful community, a hopeful community, a community that we laugh a lot together.
Yes,
And
we
it's
do.
because there's just so much joy in our life. And we're ready to help spread that, to spread that light. But where you're at, we've been there. We've been there. And I hurt for you.
That's
But it
beautiful.
doesn't, a year's going to go by. Like Tami said, a year's going to go by just like that. Think about how fast 2023 went by. I'm so glad I am not where I was, just doing the same thing that wasn't working for me over and over again. And you can have that same thing.
That's right. Thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your hope. One of my good friends, Mary, she said way back when I was starting, if you don't have your own hope, borrow somebody else's. So
Mm,
you can borrow ours if you're listening and you're like, oh, I don't know, borrow ours.
yes.
You can find ways to feel better, and we would love to help. If you want to connect with one of our coaches, download free books, get those resources Kim was talking about, just go to today's show notes page. It's fibromyalgiapodcast.com/124, and you'll find those links on that page. So thanks again, Kim. This was
Thank you,
awesome.
Tami. Thank you so much. I just really appreciate you asking me to be here today and chat with you.
Awesome. Hang on, everybody. I'll have a few more resources for you right after this. And that wraps up my interview with Kim Osborne, Certified Fibromyalgia Coach in Training. A couple things came up when Kim was talking that are covered deeper in other episodes. First, Kim mentioned an app that helps with exercise. This is the Gentler Streak app that I shared in episode 121. There will be a link where you can listen to that episode in today's show notes at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/124. You can also find episode 121 wherever you're listening to this episode right now. We also have a special link for listeners of the Fibromyalgia podcast to enjoy a 2-month free trial of Gentler Streak. That link is in the show notes for episode 121. Kim also mentioned her joy list. This is an activity I have all my students and clients do that helps them purposefully add more joy into their lives. This can be critically important when we find our lives shrinking like Kim's did. For a full walkthrough of the joy list activity, check out episode 13. We'll have a link to that in today's show notes page as well, fibromyalgiapodcast.com/121. And if Kim's story resonated with you, consider scheduling a consultation with her. As I mentioned during Kim's interview, she is a student coach in training at the moment, and she has got openings available on our Find a Coach page. Go to findafibrocoach.com or visit today's show notes for the link to schedule with a certified coach or a student like Kim. If you're interested in the Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor class that Kim talked about, or becoming a Certified Fibromyalgia Coach yourself, check out our Be a Coach page at beafibrocoach.com. That's B-B-E the letter A, fibrocoach.com. That page will outline the difference between the advisor and the coach paths and classes, as well as who each class is really made for. You'll also find the link on today's show notes page at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/124. We also have a special Be a Coach podcast series that answers several common questions about the training programs. Again, a link to that series is on today's show notes page. I also wanted to share, if you enjoyed this episode and you are looking for more stories of hope and healing, you'll find that we have done several of them here on the podcast. So you can just search your favorite podcast app for the stories of hope and healing on the Fibromyalgia podcast. We also have our next live event that will be held on Saturday, January 20th. This is our chance, really, to celebrate our students who are graduating from our Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor and Certified Fibromyalgia Coach programs, as well as share with you how they've been able to improve their fibromyalgia over the last few months. On average, students who graduate from our advisor program are able to improve their fibromyalgia impact questionnaire score, their fibro symptoms, you can think of it like. They've been able to improve that by about 50%. So usually we have some really great stories to tell during our Stories of Hope and Healing events. This is a free event that is open to the public, and we would love to have you join us. To RSVP online and get more information, just again, go to today's show notes page, fibromyalgiapodcast.com/124, and we'll have a link to that Stories of Hope and Healing event in January. See you back here next time. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stacklehouse. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.